As James said, we are going to explore the subject of the occult path, which is a very interesting subject and not very common in many traditions. In the Theosophical view, there is the idea that there are two paths. One that is a regular path of spiritual growth, by which the person little by little develops virtues and this grows spiritually. And that's the normal pace of evolution within the process in which the divine spark in each one of us discovers its true nature. But in the Theosophical view, there is another path, which is a faster path, and it is called the occult path. Occult in the sense of hidden, is unknown for most people. And the purpose of this path is not just to accelerate the evolution of a person so that the person may merely accomplish the goal earlier, but is rather to offer the opportunity to some people, to some souls, to grow so that they can help the rest of humanity in their path of spiritual evolution. In this view, not every soul is ready or even willing to take this occult path because it is really strenuous. It requires a lot of effort. And after all, you can take it slower and the goal will be attained sooner or later. So why would you overstrain yourself? And as I said, the answer is that in the same way as a child needs some adults to guide him or her, humanity needs some enlightened people to guide, the spiritual growth. These enlightened people are people who are further in the spiritual growth. And many of them have gotten to that point by treading this occult path. So let me read some quotes from Suba Ro. He was a disciple, an early member of the Theosophical Society, a disciple of the Masters. In the last session or talk, we explored the idea of Masters of the Wisdom. And he says that the steady and natural path of progress through moral effort and the practice of virtues is a natural and coherent and sure growth of the soul. So it is the normal method followed by the vast mass of humanity, and this is the course that is usually prescribed by the different religious teachers. He mentions Shankaracharya, who is one of the founders or developers of the Advaita Vedanta, as well as the Buddha and Jesus. All the religious teachings are about the normal, steady path of evolution. This steady path of evolution can be tread faster or slower. If a person is earnest and tries to work on him or herself to develop virtues and to discover the truth, can tread this path much faster than a person that is just attached to their bodies or worldly pleasures or interests and are not interested in trying to discover what the truth of the universe is. So even within this regular path, this can be tread faster or slower. But still it's a path of natural evolution, where the person grows little by little in in a more natural way. I keep using the word natural because it is what usually happens. Now he says that there is another path, the other road, and he says it's a precipitous path of occultism through a series of initiations. Only a few especially organized and peculiar natures are fit for this path. Occult progress, growth along this path, and is effected by the adept, a master of wisdom, directing through the disciple various occult forces, which enable the disciple to obtain prematurely, so to speak, a knowledge of his spiritual nature, and to obtain powers to which he is not normally entitled by the degree of his progress. Under these circumstances, it may happen that the disciple loses his moral balance and falls into the dukpa path. The word dukpa means, it's the idea of the people who develop certain powers and they get caught in the selfish, or in the sense of selfishness, and begin to use them for selfish purposes. So the idea is that we have the natural normal growth, and we have this other path in which a person is specially trained and is given certain abilities which he's not naturally entitled for. It's like, if you want to give responsibilities to a teenager, responsibilities that belong to an adult. Well, this teenager may be mature and may be able to fulfill those responsibilities, but nevertheless, he is still a teenager. So he may imagine if a teenager would be in charge of leading a country, being the president of a country. And then there is, he has a lot of power. And if he reacts as a teenager that he is, he may start a war with another country just out of pride. Well, even adults do that, presidents, but the idea is that a person that is naturally not as mature as he or she should be to handle this power is given this power in the hope that he can help. Let's suppose that the world is in a state where there are very few leaders that can help humanity. So you have to recur to very young people, as I said, they are teenagers, and you say, well, it's either this person or nobody. And then you may take the chances, but then that person may fulfill his role very well, or may fall into the natural tendencies of his state of maturity and just produce more problems than solutions. So in a certain way, a disciple, through this process of initiations that we are going to explore, is given beforehand, or before the natural time comes, a series of responsibilities and powers that he may or may not be able to handle. So of course, this doesn't happen in a random way, because this is a situation, the masters have a system where they test the person to see if that person is likely to use these responsibilities in the right way. But we will explore this presently. Now let us go on with what Subaru was saying about these two paths. So he says that the occult path is eminently dangerous to those who do not hold the talisman which ensures safety. And he describes this talisman. He says, it's a perfectly unselfish, self-forgetting, self-annihilating devotion to the religious good of mankind, a self-abnegation which is not temporal, but must have no end forever, and the object of which is the religious enlightenment of the human race. Without this talisman, though the progress of the chela, the disciple, may be very rapid for a time, a point will come when his advance will be arrested, when the real moral worth will tell, and the person who progressed along the slow and steady path may be first to merge himself in the light of the Logos. So unless this person is completely unselfish, all these powers will be a danger for the person. And we can see this in the world. There are many people who are nice people until they are given power. You know, sometimes some people say money corrupts. But some other people say no, money allows a person to show what that person really is. When we don't have opportunities, when we don't have power, then if there are seeds in ourselves to do something wrong, we don't have the opportunity to do something wrong. And that's the way life protects people. When a person is very ambitious and through many lifetimes pursues power and money and this and that, and if he doesn't have the qualities, the necessary qualities to use them in the right way, karma will eventually grant him or her the desire, and that person will be in a position of power, only to produce a lot of suffering to himself and to the people around. Because unless that person is really mature to have that power, once the person has the power, will use it in the wrong way for selfish reasons, to exploit others. So nature tries to protect people by not giving more power than the person can handle. We can force nature to give us more than we are entitled to have, either material power, as I was saying, or spiritual power if we push in that direction. But then we may, if we are not ready for that, that's something that, in the end will bring much more bad results than good results for ourselves. So unless a person is completely unselfish, it is very dangerous for that person to have more power than normal people do. And this is very easy to understand, even at the level of the power of thought. We are going to see this in the last talk. But most of us have all kinds of thoughts going through our heads. And somebody does something that I don't like, and naturally there is a reaction to, I become upset, and then I think ill of that person, and I'm angry at that person and send angry thoughts to the person. When a person has just the regular power, those thoughts are not particularly, powerful. But if a disciple begins to generate a very strong power of thought, and with his power may really affect a person. Some people do it consciously, and this is, people who do some black magic or sorcery, and they try to use the power of thought to damage a person. But even if you don't want to do that, unless you have control on your thoughts, on your thinking, if suddenly somebody gives you or strengthen the power of your thinking, then you will be damaging people unconsciously. And if you don't have the power to restrain your thoughts, you will damage these people and generate accordingly karmic results that will be obstacles in your path. So unless you first have a control over your thoughts, and you are able to drop your ill thinking even when you are upset, you cannot be given that power. You cannot be trained in developing more thought or strong thought power. Now, if you are and you develop this strength, then you can help. You can help a lot, sending good thoughts to people in suffering who may need help, to uplift others. So, like this, many other abilities or powers can be used to help humanity. And that's the idea why an adept would train a disciple. But that disciple has to have these qualities. First, a complete unselfishness, the ability to let go of personal reactions, and then to develop certain qualities that will allow him to have control over his own nature. as we are going to see, the disciple becomes an impersonal force for good in humanity. So we are in a situation, and we may not have affinity with a person, or a person may have done things to harm us, but if that person is doing something that is helping humanity, we should be able to help that person doing whatever he or she is doing to help humanity, and not say, well, this person did this to me or that, therefore why would I help this person, or why would I cooperate? For example, I'm giving some simple examples of how that person, a disciple, loses the personal rights, but not because, they are stripped from him. If this process is genuine, the disciple realizes that, or he begins to develop an attraction for the good and not for the personal desires or the personal reactions. The attraction for whatever is good is stronger than the attachment to the personal reactions. So let us go on with Suva Raw's description. And he says that because of the danger of this path, many schools, religious schools, recommend as the best path for all the one of devotion to virtue, the gradual withdrawal from the grosser material concerns towards the spiritual. And he says, it is therefore wiser not to seek the path of chelaship, the occult path. If a person is fit for it, then his karma will lead him to the occult path imperceptibly and infallibly. For the path of occultism seeks the chela and will not fail to find him when the fit person presents himself. So the idea is that although this path exists, no person should try to force himself into this path. If a person is ready, then the opportunity will come to him or her naturally, and we are going to explore how. So basically, what every person should try to do, every person's interested in spirituality, is just to try to do the best that that person can be, the best way he can act, be honest and earnest, and let a higher wisdom that is beyond our brain consciousness decide whether you are fit or not for a particular path. Actually, if your concern really is to try to grow spiritually in order to help the others, you are not much concerned whether you are on the occult path or not. That's something that will happen, and it's something of secondary importance to you whether you are in the path or not, or all that belongs more to the personality and the ambition. The person may imagine that, I'm on the occult path, that's something special, or this or that. Well, that has to disappear for the person to be able to tread the occult path safely. So there is a point where the person doesn't think much about it. Now, it may be that the ideal of the masters and helping the masters, especially in the Theosophical tradition where this is an important element, may be a source of inspiration, the idea of the masters. And that's perfectly fine for a person to, if that inspires that person to do good, and that person may think of the masters and trying to help the masters, just as a Christian would think of Jesus. Whatever helps you and whatever spiritual ideal inspires you is perfectly fine. If some other people have more abstract ideals, that's also fine. So it's not that you should never think of the masters or something like that, but trying to force yourself into the occult path is something different. It is said that karma eventually will always respond to your desires. If you desire something consistently, whether that is good or not for you, you will produce a karmic result. So that's why, as I mentioned, I think in previous talks, sometimes you see people who are absolutely unfit to be in the position they are, and yet they are there because they desire that, for enough lifetimes or with enough intensity, and they are given that, which for that person may seem like a blessing at the moment, but it may be a curse if the person is using that in the wrong way. So what Subaru says here is, yes, these two paths exist. One, the ideal in this occult path is to make a person fit to help humanity faster than what it would take during the normal path, but you shouldn't seek for it. If you are fit for it, it will come to you. Now, I made just to give you as a metaphor, I made a calculation about how long it is supposed to take for all humanity to reach, liberation in the normal course, and in how long a person going through the occult path would get to the same goal. And of course, these numbers are just, we don't even know these numbers. But I think it's interesting to see. But it's like if a person had to do, an adult, let's say 20 years old, had to go through all the experience that a normal person would go through until he or she dies when he's 90 years old, let's say, in 5 months. So in 5 months, that person has to go through all the experiences, all the suffering, all the effort that a person goes normally in 70 more years. So the point is that this occult path concentrates a lot of effort in very few years, which are a few thousands of years in the whole picture of evolution, but these few thousands of years are nothing compared to what it takes a normal evolution of humanity. So you will have, in 5 months, a person that is absolutely fit to help others. That would take 90 or 70 more years for a person. Don't take these numbers more than as a figure. I was just curious to see the proportions, and they may be pretty different, but it's more or less the idea. So let us explore the different stages of this occult path. The idea is that when a person, or much before a person is ready to begin this path, the masters of wisdom are aware of this person. In several places, different people have said that it's like the master is like they have this view as if they were on a mountain. They have the view of a dark valley, and whenever there is a person that is getting ready to be approached, it's like if you, in the dark night, one house turns the light on. There is no way you can miss that light. So they say there is no way a master can miss a person that would be fit for this path. So when they see that there is a person that is approaching that, they may put in his way a little test or a little task to see if there, an opportunity to help. It may be very, very small to the person's eye, but he is trying to give the person the opportunity to nourish this inspiration or aspiration to help. Because the only reason, as I said, why a master would take care of training a person would be if that person will become a helper of the masters. As we are going to see in our next meeting, the masters use all their time and energy helping at the level, on the inner planes, at the level of the soul. And if a master is going to waste time to train a person, and all that time he cannot do the work the more universal work that he's doing, it is only because he hopes that the time that he's spending in one particular individual will bring better results, than if he would spend that time helping on the universal levels that they help. So they would also take care of training a person if that person has or is promising in becoming a helper of the masters, and then they can do some work for humanity in the name of the masters. So as this person grows more into this aspiration to help and begins to develop more spiritual maturity, then he's approached by a master. And we are going to see in our next talk what the qualities of a person should be to be ready for a master to approach, that particular person. Of course, this is not like a recipe, okay? You have this and this and this, and then a master will come. Everything is much more complex. But there is, as we said, if you are selfish, you are not going to be fit to tread this occult path. If you don't have self-control, you are not fit for it, because it would damage you and you would damage other people. Nobody will give you a sword to defend people if you don't know how to handle the sword, because then you will hurt yourself and hurt your friends in trying to defend them. So there are certain qualities that you must fulfill. And we are going to see that in our next talk. But once a person is fit to be approached, the first thing that happens is that this person is put in what is called probation. So the idea is that, as I said, the masters work mainly on the inner planes. When we go to sleep, as we saw in previous talks, our consciousness leaves the physical body, and then it's on what sometimes is called the astral plane, or it's aware on the inner planes. This is the plane of the dreams. Some dreams are just things that happen in our own mind, but some other dreams are actually recollections of a life that we have on the astral plane. So when the person is ready and he goes to sleep, a master would approach that person on the astral plane and offer that person to become a disciple in probation. There is no much, ceremony or anything. It is said that the master or even an advanced disciple would approach this person and explain the situation and offer the opportunity to enter in this stage of probation. If the person knows all this, when we go to sleep, we have all the knowledge that we acquire on the physical plane and even more that we acquire on the inner planes. If the person knows all this, when he's approached, he knows exactly what this person is talking about. If that person belongs to a tradition that doesn't have this knowledge, then it takes some more explanation to explain, okay, this is what is going on, this is the question with these two paths. I think one example of that, as I mentioned last time, and I may be completely wrong, but I have the feeling when I read the autobiography of Toller, he said, I was taken in a dream to, I think he says, a higher college where there were saints that took me and they explained to me certain things. So he had to be taught on the inner planes all this, and because the Christianity doesn't have this tradition in particular. But anyway, the idea is that this person will be approached on the astral plane, on the inner planes, and if the person accepts to be put on probation, it is said that the master creates an image of the astral body and the mental body of the person, and that image is connected to the real astral body and mental body of the person. I'm sorry I'm talking about all these things that presuppose that you have a basic knowledge of what the astral body, the mental body is. We already saw all this or explored all this in previous talks. If you don't know about it, then you can either watch previous talks or read about it. But the idea is that the master would create an image of the astral body, the mental body of the disciple in probation, and everything that happens emotionally or mentally to the person would be reflected on this image. So the master could see how the disciple is going on during this probation. And usually there is no much interaction between the master and the disciple during this period. The probation is only implies that the master will keep an eye on the disciple, but there is a very important effect on the karmic level, at the karmic motion of the disciple. And let me read some quotes. One of the masters, the Mahatma K.H., said, to be accepted as a disciple on probation is an easy thing, easy relatively speaking. To become an accepted chela is to court the miseries of probation. Life in the ordinary run is not entirely made up of heavy trials and mental misery. But the life of a chela who offers himself is one of long sacrifice. He who would control hereafter the events of his life, here and beyond, has first of all to submit himself to be controlled by fate. This is, I'm adding, by fate. Yet triumph over every temptation, every woe of flesh and mind. And he goes on to say, the mass of human sin and frailty is distributed throughout the life of a person who is content to remain an average mortal. But it is gathered and centered, so to say, within one period of the life of a disciple, the period of probation. That which is generally accumulating to find its legitimate issue only in the next rebirth of an ordinary person is quickened and fanned into existence in the chela. So the idea is that there is a concentration of karma, especially the what we could call the negative karma, for several reasons. One, because the negative karma is an obstruction. We are not free to help the masters until we paid off all the obstacles that we have generated for many years in the past. You know, as we said when we explored the idea of karma, at the beginning of evolution, because of the spiritual ignorance that we all have, most of the things we do are wrong from a spiritual point of view. So that generates a lot of negative karma. But that karma is held off by the law until the person becomes more mature. Because if all the negative karma would fall immediately on the person, it would simply crush the personality. You know, just say a savage person may kill a lot of people. So if that karma has to come immediately, then that person would be killed for 10 lives in a row, so to say. You know, and what could that soul grow or learn? So for the first part of evolution, a lot of this negative karma is accumulated until the soul acquires the ability to learn. The idea of karma is not that it is a punishment. It is to be an educational process. So that karma is not going to come to the person until the person can profit from it, can learn something from it. So when that person begins to be mature, there is quite a bit of previous karma that is accumulated that now begins to come to the person. And that's why we many times see, you know, bad people who seem to do bad things and never get the consequences. And then perfectly good people that they have one thing after the other. Because that, from our point of view, it may seem unfair, but from the point of view of karma that doesn't try to punish people, as I said, but to teach, well, karma is forgiving at the beginning, as we may be forgiving with a child, until that person has the ability to learn. So when the disciple is put in probation, there is negative karma that is an obstacle for that person to be free to help humanity. So that karma has to be paid off or worked out. But also in that process, that disciple has to learn or has to be purified by the process, let's say. So paying off the obstructive karma, being purified by the process and learning, through the difficulties, and also being tested are the three aims of the period of probation. A person needs to be tested to know how he or she will react in difficult situations. And this is explained by the master saying, the pupil is tested, tempted, and examined by all and every means, so as to have his real nature drawn out. That is the rule with us and is inexorable. We have to know of what he may become capable under different and every kind of opportunities. As I said, this person is going to be given power, and the masters have to be sure that this person will use it in the right way. So we all may be very nice people when the situations are nice and easy, but how do we react when we are in a difficult situation? Are we able to control ourselves, not to indulge in producing harm to others as a personal reaction? Because as I said, when we have a greater power, if we are not able to hold that, we will produce more danger or hurt or damage. So the period of probation will work out the old karma, will produce a purification, an education, and also will be a test to see if the person, or to explore all the dark corners of the person. And Blavatsky says that this is necessary also because the master assumes, karmically speaking, the responsibility for the disciple. So she says that very few are aware of the enormous, almost limitless responsibility assumed by the teacher for the sake of the pupil. From the moment they begin to really teach, from the instant they confer any power, whether psychic, mental, or physical, on their pupils, they take upon themselves all the sins of that pupil in connection with the occult sciences. Until the moment when initiation makes the pupil a master and responsible in its turn. Thus, it is clear why the teachers are so reticent and why chelas are required to serve 7 years of probation to prove their fitness and develop the qualities necessary to the security of both master and pupil. It is usually said that the period of probation lasts 7 years of, this concentrated karma. It may last longer, it may last the whole life, or it may last less, according to how the person responds to it. But as you can see, the idea is that the master takes responsibility, karmic responsibility for what the disciple does. And some people say, why? That's kind of unfair. But Blavatsky explained, the spiritual guru, taking the student by the hand, leads him into and introduces him to a world entirely unknown to the pupil. So long, then, as the pupil acts upon this principle, but is too ignorant to be sure of his vision and powers of discrimination, is it not natural that it is the guide who should be responsible for the sins of him who he has led into those dangerous regions. So all this power that the disciple has were given by the master. Given in the sense that he was taught how to develop all this. Nothing is conferred, upon us. Everything is developed. But they are the ones that led the disciple to these regions. So they are responsible for that. And they have to be sure that the disciple is earnest, honest, that is unselfish, so that he may fail, but there are two different kinds of failings. One failing is the natural failing that happens when we are learning. If we are learning to ride a bicycle, then we will fall, and we will fall again, and that's not a failing. I mean, it's a mistake if you want to see it, but it's inevitable. It's part of the process of learning. But there is a different failing, which is when the disciple begins to use these powers in a selfish way. And that's something that cuts the relationship with the masters. And the master really suffers for it. Suffers karmic consequences. So Blavatsky always said, you don't know what sacrifice the master is making in taking disciples. And only for the reason of the hope that this person may become fit to help humanity. So once the person passes these years of probation, it is accepted as a regular disciple. So at the moment of acceptance, again, this happens on the inner planes, and the master blends the disciple's aura, that is the emotional and mental body, with that of the master. In this blending, there is like a connection between the master and the disciple, so that the influence of the master can flow through the disciple unconsciously. It's not that so that the master doesn't have to do something consciously through the disciple. There is a connection, and the influence of the master goes through the disciple. Now, this influence only goes through the disciple when the disciple is vibrating in a way that is in tune with the master. If the disciple is feeling, anger or jealousy or whatever is selfish, that blocks the influence of the master. But the problem is that because of this connection, whatever the disciple is feeling is also reflected in the master's aura. So many times these feelings bother the work of the master. Now the master has the ability to put like a veil that isolates the disciple so that he's not interrupted in the work that he's doing, but then that cuts off the connection with the disciple, and the disciple is left by himself until he or she gets again in tune with the master, and then the veil can be removed. So a disciple, an accepted disciple, is a person that will guarantee that for the most part his feelings and thoughts will be more or less in tune with those of the master. Not perfect, he's not a master, he's not enlightened, but the general tone of his activity should be in tune with that of the master. And now all this happens on the inner planes, and the person may not know that he is a disciple, that he's on probation or is a disciple. Knowing is tricky in several ways, because it is said that always when a person, if the masters do something in favor of a person, because of this balance between the good and evil in the universe, or what we call good and evil, a door is open for the forces of darkness to do the same on the disciple. So, for example, if a master appears to you in your room, visibly, that allows what they call the dukpas to appear and impersonate a master also. So, whenever they have a conscious relationship with a person, they have to teach that person how to differentiate a real master from one that is not. Because they will, they will try to come and impersonate a master and make you do wrong things, many times in a subtle way. So until the person doesn't have the perception to really differentiate this, many times it's safer that the master doesn't expose that person to this problem. So the personality is many times protected by not knowing that he or she is a disciple, either in probation or accepted. Now, it depends on the person. Sometimes a hint will be given through dreams, which are not actually dreams. If they are real, they are just memories on the astral plane. So that person may have a recollection of he being told that he's a disciple or something like that. But, dreams are really tricky. You never know if it is true, if it is your mind that created them, or if it is another entity putting that in your head and impersonating a master. In the Theosophical view, it is important to learn about the astral plane, because most people assume that whatever entity communicates with you has to be a god or an angel. Well, no, the astral plane is really tricky, and you have good entities, neutral, you have bad entities, you have people who know nothing. So it's very complex. It's a whole universe. So you cannot assume that because you had a dream or because an entity came to communicate to you and tells you are a disciple, you cannot assume that that is true. So although sometimes through dreams this knowledge is conveyed, it's still tricky. You never know if it is true or not. And as I said, it is not that important for you to know that you may be a disciple or not. It is only important if that helps you go through the hardships, because that is the problem. In all religious traditions, there is, or in most of them, there is a certain emphasis on the role of suffering in the spiritual life. In Christianity, you have this idea that you have to carry the cross as Jesus did for us. And mystics, they have always this idea that the spiritual path has a period of what they call purgation, which entails a lot of suffering. So they don't know very well why, or some of them don't. But there is the idea that you have go through this period of purgation, so that when it happens to you as a mystic, for example, as a spiritual person, you have the courage to go through it. Otherwise, you naturally think, what is wrong with me? Why is all this happening to me? We assume that if bad things happen to us, it's because we are doing something wrong. And that is not necessarily the case. So in many traditions, there is this idea that at a certain point, a period of, the dark night of the soul will come on you. In the Theosophical view, this idea of probation is very well explained, so that if a person is going through it, that may help that person to, retain the courage, to keep trying to do the right thing. It helps the personality when the personality doesn't know that it's really going through that. And even if we are not going through probation, it's always a help for the person to go through the suffering, in the best possible way. All these stages repeat in lower levels. So even if we are not really going through a real probation, we may be going through a period in our lives that it is a kind of probation. Even though after that we are not going to have a personal relationship with the masters, but after that there may be an opening in our consciousness. So, these things always help, even if you don't know in what stage you are at. And knowing exactly the stage, as I said, is not necessarily the best thing, because of all these other difficulties that I was talking about. So eventually, when the disciple is accepted, it becomes to be a channel for the influence of the masters. And with the word channel, I'm not meaning this idea, the modern idea of channeling, where there are entities talking through you. As I said, there are many entities that can talk through a person, and those entities may be very low entities or maybe spiritual entities. Many times the accepted disciple, as we said, is absolutely unconscious that through him or her the influence of the master is being spread. But that doesn't matter, the influence of the master is still spread. And when the person develops certain qualities, that person is ready to be initiated. As we are going to see in our next talk, there is a path of initiation where the consciousness of the disciple is artificially expanded so that that person has a glimpse of a state of consciousness which then he or she will have to work to be established in that state of consciousness. So the initiation produces a state of consciousness that then the person has to work hard to cement in himself, to really conquer, if you want to put it in that way. But we are going to see the path of initiation in our next talk. So the idea is that before we finish, the person goes through this probation, then there is this, he may become an accepted disciple, and there is one more step which may come before or after the first initiation, that is sometimes called the sonship, or the state of sonship in the sense of being the son of the master, spiritually speaking, where the connection between the master and the disciple is much closer. It entails a connection at the level of the higher mental, which is the human soul, at the level of the soul, not the personality. So far we had said that the person, the emotional body and the mental body of the person was connected with the master. That belongs to the personality. But in this other stage, even the soul of the disciple is connected to the soul of the master. And at that point, the master cannot draw a veil to separate himself from the disciple if the disciple is doing something wrong. So this step happens only when the master is completely sure of the disciple, of the disciple's, maturity. And as I said, that may come before or after the first initiation. It depends on the disciple's development. But that's more or less the idea of this occult path. We are going to, as I said, to explore in our next talk the different initiations and the qualifications for this. But today I wanted to present, generally speaking, the entrance on the occult path. The real entrance happens when the person is initiated on the inner planes. So if there is any question or comment, we can discuss it as usual.
We have one question from online.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest to read after this lecture, is the question.
There are some articles that Madame Blavatsky wrote about it. Well, you could go to the TS Wiki. This is like an encyclopedia we are creating online with the software that Wikipedia uses. And the address is tswiki.net. And then you can search for Chela, Chela, which is a Sanskrit word for disciple, or master, or chelaship, or probation, all these words. And you can read, you will see quotes from all this, and also you will find at the bottom articles, links to articles about it. There are a few articles by HPB. One is called Chelas and Masters. Another one is called Lay Chelas and Accepted Chelas, or something like that. Then there is an article by Subha Roy, The Occultism in the Southern India. Then there is this. Blavatsky never talked really much about the initiations. She didn't describe the different initiations, but Annie Besant and Leadbeater did. If if you like their writings. Annie Besant wrote a book on initiation. Leadbeater wrote this book on the Masters and the Path. So there is quite a few literature about it, but I think if you go to the wiki, the TS wiki, you will find a lot of material there online. Ed and then Joe.
How many people do you know that's on the occult path?
I don't know any, but it's hard to tell. I mean, you know, this question is many times there. Many times disciples don't know each other. Many times disciples don't know they are disciples. And at the beginning of the TS, this was like more public for several reasons. First, because Blavatsky and the masters wanted to bring the idea of the masters, the occult path, the discipleship, and therefore they had to talk about it, because they want this idea to be available for all of us students. So all this was more public, but of course this brought a lot of problems, because then many people were ambitious. If you know that, you know, she is a disciple, you say, oh, she's a disciple, I can be a disciple. Why am not a disciple and she's a disciple? She doesn't seem, after all, to be, you know, much better than I am. Because what we see through the personality is a shadow of what we really are. So the master sees what we really are. So that brought a lot of problems. And then that brought people that say, hey, I am a disciple. I had a dream where I was told, or I had an entity telling me I am a disciple. And that brought a lot of problems. So little by little, people started saying, okay, you know, stop talking about this. And most disciples won't say that they are disciples. Some of them in the past may have told that to some friends in more intimate circles when, you know, it was pretty obvious that they could be disciples. And I mean, for example, people like Jeffrey Hudson or even Dora Kuntz or Clara Codd. But the tendency is not to say anything about it. So it's hard to tell.
Earlier you mentioned kind of a trial period called the dark night of the soul. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and about what that is and how it relates?
Well, there are different interpretations of that. And that dark night of the soul appears in different stages of the growth of the soul. In the way I'm using it right now, it would be the period of probation. You know, Blavatsky used to say, oh, you Europeans are like too sissy to go through the period of probation. In the East, they are tougher in the sense that, you know, this is what Blavatsky used to say, that they are not so hung up on their personality and pride and comfort, and they don't complain if the bed is too hard. But if you go to a place and the bed is hard, you complain, you know, by that very small thing. So she would say, probation is, during a period of time, is one thing after the other, you know, without being able to catch a breath. And you have to profit from it, not just to go through it and resent it. You have to be able, of course, we always resent suffering, you know, at a certain level. But then you have to be willing to revisit that once and again and try to see it from a different point of view. And it's something that is, you know, is hard. So the person really feels that there is going through the dark night of the soul, where that person lost, for the most part, you know, moments of happiness, or that person used to feel joy in even just being in nature. Now, you know, mainly what is there is a process of conflict, inner or outer. Many times it has nothing to do with the outer. and it's all psychological or very little to do with the outer, it doesn't need to be a catastrophe outside, because what is really being pushed is our inner buttons, the reactions. Or sometimes, if the karma of the person is such, there may be something outside. But regardless, it's a period of sustained strain. And actually, one of the requisites, as we are going to see in the next talk, is a good physical health, so that the body can sustain the strain, not only mentally and emotionally, but even the body. The body is affected by the constant stress. So, as I said, if this happens, or smaller probations may happen in our life without necessarily having to be the probation that we are talking about, or we may be in the midst of it. But whatever the case, we have to develop a certain capacity, the ability to know how to suffer. To me, one key in the spiritual path is to learn how to suffer. How to suffer without being too resentful, without becoming too angry. All these things happen, But at the beginning, we are like caught off guard, and then we react more. Then with time, first we become accustomed to it, and then we little by little learn to be meeker, not to react to it. And that's something that is important, to learn how to suffer without reacting. Once we get there, then we are safe, because the reactions are always a reaction to the suffering. So when we develop the ability to suffer without reacting too much, then we are safe. I always say that when I was a teenager and I studied karate, one of the first things that our senpai, our teacher, did was to tie our belts to another person, and with boxing gloves to start hitting each other. And you couldn't retreat because you were tied. And the purpose was so that we become accustomed to the punches, and until the point that we say, well, after all, it's a punch. Sometimes I would go home with I couldn't open my mouth because it really hurt a few times, but that happens. But then there is a point where you say, this is nothing. I mean, it's not too bad. At the beginning, you are afraid of the punches. But only when you become accustomed to it and you are not afraid of it, you can be calm in the middle of the battle, because you are not afraid. When you are afraid, you freak out and then you lose control. So this is what happens in the probation. At the beginning, it's harder, and little by little, you become accustomed. And at a certain point, the process is over, and not that suffering will never come again, as we are going to see. That is part of the spiritual growth. But the process of probation is over. Diane.
I was thinking over and over what you said, but it's kind of a relief to know that it's not from one lifetime. It's from many lifetimes, and it isn't at all about Diane or whoever the name is. I'm just an envelope. Mm-hmm. It kind of gives more meaning to.
Yeah, and also, usually, although we never like to suffer, usually these things, unless we push for it, which few people do, pushing for it would be to become ambitious and trying to be a disciple and going from here to there, trying to develop powers or to this or that. But for most people, when this comes, it's because we have the strength to go through it. And also, every person is different. Some people may be either stronger, or their life circumstances may allow it to go in a more concentrated way in less period of time. Some others, it may be spread for longer time. And there is a higher wisdom that knows how to handle this. So we shouldn't worry too much about it. And if we are not ready, that won't happen, or it will happen only up to the point where we are ready.
One final question from online. Doesn't the disciple have to have a desire and intention to be taught by the master before the master notices them?
No, not really. What the person needs to have is an aspiration to help. People from any tradition may be contacted by masters, and then they interpret who is contacting them in terms of their own tradition. You know, a Christian mystic will say, Jesus came and, took me here or there, or taught me this and that. A Buddhist would talk about some bodhisattva but in any tradition, any sincere person that really wants to help humanity and that is fit for it may be contacted by a master on the inner planes. So we don't need to have the aspiration. But as I said, the aspiration to help the master may be an inspiration for us to do the right thing. So we can have it as long as it doesn't become a personal ambition. So, many people are inspired to help somebody. If you love the master or Jesus or whoever it is, that love may inspire you to help or do something that is not comfortable for you out of love for the master. When you love your children, your wife, whoever it is, you will sacrifice yourself out of love for them. If you love the master, Jesus, or whatever your ideal is, you may do things out of this love. So in that sense, it is fine to have the aspiration to work for the master or, similar things. But you don't need that to be contacted by the master. All you need is to have the aspiration to help humanity and to be fit, as we are going to see in our next talk, to have a certain qualifications at the spiritual level.